Michael Jordan discovers his childhood rival lost his leg. What he does next inspires millions. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan was known for many things: his championships, his competitive fire, and his endless pursuit of greatness. But there was something he rarely spoke about: his childhood rivalry with a boy from his neighborhood. The two of them had spent countless hours battling it out on the basketball courts, each pushing the other to new heights. For Jordan, that rivalry had been the spark that ignited his passion for the game. But it was never just about competition. It was about the bond they shared, the respect they had for each other, and the way they both knew that without the other, they wouldn't have reached the levels they did. His childhood rival, Marcus, was the type of player who could match Jordan's intensity on the court. They were inseparable at times, always finding a way to push each other to the limits, even though they never played on the same team. Marcus wasn't a household name like Jordan, but to those who knew him, he was just as fierce, just as determined. He played with a rawness that was impossible to ignore. Every time Jordan made a move, Marcus was right there, trying to one-up him, to show that he could keep up. In those early years, it was clear that both of them were destined for something greater. But as time went on, their paths diverged. Jordan went on to college, then the NBA, becoming a global phenomenon. Marcus, though talented, didn't get the same breaks. He played in local leagues, continued practicing, but eventually his dream of making it big in basketball began to fade. He never gave up on the game, but his opportunities didn't come. The world, it seemed, had moved on without him, and for a long time, Marcus struggled to reconcile the dreams he had once shared with Jordan. Their rivalry was more than just a series of basketball games. It was a reflection of who they both were at the time. For Jordan, Marcus represented a challenge, a reason to keep pushing himself to be better. But for Marcus, Jordan represented everything he wanted to be, everything he knew he could be if only the world had given him the chance. Years passed, and the two men drifted apart. Jordan went on to achieve legendary status, winning championships, breaking records, and becoming a name that was known around the world. Marcus, on the other hand, continued to live a quieter life. The dreams of NBA glory faded, and though basketball remained a part of him, it wasn't the same. Then came the news. It was a cold evening when Jordan's phone rang. The name on the screen made his heart stop for a moment. It was a mutual friend from Wilmington, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. When he answered, the news hit him like a freight train. "Mike, it's Marcus. He's been in an accident. Bad one. He's lost his leg." Jordan's mind raced. It didn't feel real. Marcus? The guy who had always been able to keep up with him, the guy who had pushed him harder than anyone else. The thought that this man, his old rival, had faced something so severe, so life-altering, made Jordan's stomach turn. The news weighed heavily on Jordan. The memories of their shared battles, of their heated games, came rushing back. He remembered the last time they spoke, how they joked about one day playing together in the NBA, how they both shared the same dream, even if the world hadn't given Marcus the same shot. But now, that dream seemed so far away. Marcus had lost more than just his leg. He had lost a part of himself, the piece of him that had always driven him forward, that had kept him in the game, even when the odds were against him. Jordan knew he couldn't just sit by. He had to do something. His mind started working, thinking about what he could do, what could help Marcus not just recover physically but mentally as well. He thought about how he had felt in his own low moments, moments when everything seemed impossible. The only thing that had kept him going was the belief that he could still achieve greatness, that he could still make a difference. But what about Marcus? How could Jordan, who had achieved everything he could ever want, help the man who had once been his greatest rival, who had pushed him to become the person he was today? Jordan felt a need to do something. He wasn't sure what, but he knew he couldn't ignore this. He had to act. He knew that this wasn't just about helping a friend, it was about helping someone who had played a pivotal role in his life, someone who had made him a better player, a better man. The idea began to form, slowly at first. Jordan would go to Marcus. He would visit him. He would be there, in person, in a way that went beyond a phone call or a letter. He would give Marcus the one thing he had given him all those years ago, the belief that anything was possible if you put your mind to it. But there was more to it than that. Jordan wanted to do something that would truly inspire Marcus, something that would show him that he wasn't alone, that the world hadn't forgotten about him. He didn't know exactly what form that would take, but he knew it had to be personal. It had to be a gesture that spoke louder than words. The next few days were filled with planning. Jordan contacted local rehab centers, reaching out to facilities where Marcus was recovering, gathering information on how best to support him. The more he learned about the physical and emotional challenges Marcus was facing, the more determined Jordan became to find a way to help. It was a strange feeling for Jordan. He had spent his entire life in the spotlight, surrounded by adoration, praise, and accolades. But this wasn't about public recognition. It wasn't about doing something to make headlines. This was personal. This was about one man helping another who had once been a rival, a friend, a part of his history. As the days passed and the plan took shape, Jordan's excitement grew. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, one that wasn't about basketball or business. It was about something deeper, something that transcended sports. It was about helping a friend get back on his feet, helping him find hope when it seemed lost. Jordan knew this would be a journey, one that would require patience, understanding, and compassion. But he was ready for it. He wasn't just doing this for Marcus, he was doing it for the bond they had shared, the lessons they had taught each other along the way. He was about to take the first step on a path that would change both of their lives forever. Michael Jordan arrived in Wilmington early in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. It felt almost surreal, coming back to the place where it all began, but this time, there was no basketball court waiting for him, no championship game, no fans lining up to see him. This visit was about something deeper, something more personal. Jordan had spoken to Marcus's family several times since hearing the news. They had filled him in on the details of Marcus's accident, how it had happened on a rainy night, how Marcus's car had hydroplaned on the slick roads, and how, in a split second, everything changed. They told Jordan how hard it had been for Marcus to process the accident, how it had taken time before he could even begin to think about his future. Jordan had always been the type of person who took action. Waiting was never his style. He had made the decision to visit Marcus without hesitation, but now, as he pulled into the parking lot of the rehab facility, his heart began to race. This wasn't a basketball game or a business deal, this was personal, and he wasn't sure what to expect. He walked through the entrance, past the friendly but tired-looking staff at the front desk, and made his way down the hallway toward the room where Marcus was staying. The place was calm, almost eerily so. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, and the quiet hum of machines added to the solemnity of the moment. There were other patients, but they all seemed absorbed in their own worlds, their own struggles. Jordan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy for them, for the battles they were fighting behind the closed doors of their rooms. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure what kind of reception he would get. He knew Marcus. He knew how proud he was, how stubborn he could be. Would he be angry or upset? Or would he be grateful, touched by the gesture of his old rival coming to visit him? He knocked lightly on the door, and after a brief moment, a quiet voice called out from inside, "Come in." Jordan opened the door and stepped inside. He saw Marcus lying in bed, propped up with pillows, looking out the window. He had a prosthetic leg beside him, but it wasn't the only thing that had changed about him. Marcus's face had aged more than he expected. There was a weariness in his eyes, something that hadn't been there when they had last spoken. The man who had once been so full of energy and fire now looked like someone who had been defeated by life itself. "Hey, Marcus," Jordan said softly, stepping into the room. "It's been a long time." Marcus turned slowly, his face lighting up when he saw who was standing there. For a split second, it almost seemed like time had stopped, as if they were back on the playground, those old days of basketball in Wilmington, competing fiercely, laughing, joking. "Mike," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't know you even knew." Jordan smiled, trying to ease the tension in the room. "I know more than you think, man. You didn't think I'd forget about you, did you?" Marcus let out a small laugh, but it was clear that the situation was still overwhelming for him. He didn't know how to process the fact that Jordan, a man who had reached the pinnacle of the basketball world, was standing in front of him in a rehab facility. "You didn't have to come," Marcus said, his tone slightly defensive. "I'm not the same guy I was. I can't play anymore. I can't do what I used to do." Jordan could sense the bitterness in Marcus's words. He could hear the frustration, the pain in his voice, and it stung him to the core. He knew that feeling, the doubt, the question of identity when everything you've worked for is suddenly taken away from you. He had gone through it when he first retired from basketball, the empty feeling of no longer having that thing that defined you. "You don't have to play anymore, Marcus," Jordan replied, his voice firm. "You've done more than most people could dream of. It's not about playing anymore. It's about what's next. It's about the fight. And you've always had that fight in you. Remember when we used to go at it on the court? I know you. You don't back down." There was a long silence as Marcus processed his words. He looked down at his prosthetic leg, running his hand over the smooth surface. For a moment, the room seemed to close in around them, and Jordan could see the weight of Marcus's situation bearing down on him. "I don't know if I can do it, Mike," Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. "I don't know how to be this person." Jordan didn't know what the right answer was. He didn't have the magic words to make Marcus feel better, but he knew one thing: he couldn't give up on him. He couldn't let his old rival, the guy who had pushed him harder than anyone else, give up on himself. "Marcus, listen to me," Jordan said, moving closer to the bed. "You're going to get through this. And I'm here to make sure you do. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to lie to you. But you've got something most people don't have. You've got heart. That's why we were rivals all those years ago. Because you've got the heart to keep going when others give up." Marcus looked up, meeting Jordan's gaze. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, hope, maybe, or maybe just the realization that Jordan wasn't going to leave him. He wasn't going to walk away like everyone else had. "What are you going to do for me, Mike?" Marcus asked, his voice quieter now. Jordan smiled again, this time with a knowing look. "I've got something for you, Marcus. Something that'll help you get back to doing what you love." Marcus raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" Jordan reached into his bag, pulling out a carefully wrapped package. It wasn't much, just a simple box, but the weight of it felt heavy. "I've been working on something for you. Something that'll help you get back in the game." He set the box down on Marcus's lap, and for the first time, Marcus seemed genuinely curious. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a custom prosthetic leg designed for someone who wanted to play basketball again. It was sleek, durable, and engineered for movement, allowing Marcus to regain the mobility he had lost. It wasn't just any prosthetic leg, it was designed for Marcus to play basketball, to move like he had before, to return to the game he had loved. For a long moment, Marcus just stared at the leg, the gift from his old rival. And then the tears came. "You did this for me?" Marcus choked out, his voice cracking. "I did it because I believe in you, Marcus," Jordan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I believe you've still got something to offer. You've got a lot of fight left in you. You just have to see it for yourself." Marcus wiped away his tears, looking at the prosthetic, and then back at Jordan. He didn't know what to say, but the overwhelming feeling of gratitude was evident. "Thank you, Mike. Thank you for not forgetting about me." The weeks following Jordan's visit were filled with a quiet anticipation for Marcus. At first, the new prosthetic leg sat in his room, a reminder of a life he wasn't sure he could return to. The emotional weight of the gift was almost too much to bear, and for a time, Marcus struggled with how to even begin using it. His first attempts to walk with it had been awkward, painful, and filled with doubt. He had never imagined that a simple game of basketball would one day seem so distant from his reality. Every movement he made felt like a reminder of the life he once knew, a life that had been taken from him in an instant. But there was something about Jordan's presence that lingered with Marcus long after the visit. It wasn't just the prosthetic leg, it was the message that Jordan had brought with him. The belief that it wasn't over, that Marcus could still move forward, that he still had something to give. No one had told him that for a long time. He had been told that his life would be different, that he'd have to adjust to a new reality. But Jordan had given him hope that his future didn't have to be defined by his accident. It could be something more. At the rehab facility, Marcus began his slow recovery. The rehab therapists helped him adjust to the new leg, but it wasn't just about physical therapy. It was also about mental and emotional healing. Every day, Marcus worked at it, despite the pain and frustration. Each step was a reminder of what he had lost, but it was also a small victory, a quiet triumph over the circumstances that had tried to hold him back. As the days passed, Marcus felt the pull of the court again. He hadn't played in months, and the thought of basketball made him feel both inspired and scared. Would he still have the same ability? Could he even move the way he used to? He wasn't sure, but one thing was certain, he was ready to try. He had to try. For himself. Jordan kept in touch, calling regularly to check on him. The calls weren't long, but they were always filled with encouragement. There was something about hearing Jordan's voice, that familiar confidence in his words, that gave Marcus a renewed sense of purpose. Jordan believed in him. That belief was enough to make Marcus believe in himself again. One day, after weeks of practicing with the prosthetic leg, Marcus walked into the rehab center's gym. It wasn't much, a small, nondescript room with a few worn-out basketballs and a half-court, but it was enough. He had always dreamed of returning to a real court, but this was where he had to start. The rehab staff watched from the sidelines, their eyes on him, but Marcus didn't notice. He was focused on the hoop in front of him, the basketball in his hands. The ball felt foreign at first, the weight of it different, but it was still the game he had loved. It was still the thing that had driven him every day. He took a deep breath and dribbled the ball for the first time in months. His movements were slow, calculated, but they felt natural, even though he hadn't felt this way in a long time. He took a few more dribbles, testing his balance, his coordination. The prosthetic leg felt sturdy, solid beneath him. There was pain, of course, there always would be. But there was also something else, a sense of freedom. For the first time since the accident, Marcus felt like himself again. He didn't know what his future in basketball would look like, but he knew one thing for sure, he was going to keep pushing. Jordan was the first person Marcus called when he sank his first shot from the three-point line. It wasn't a perfect shot, but it didn't matter. He had made it. He was back in the game. "Mike, I did it. I actually did it," Marcus said, his voice filled with emotion. Jordan's laugh came through the phone loud and clear. "I knew you would, man. I knew it." That moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in Marcus's life. It wasn't about reclaiming the career he had lost. It was about rediscovering himself, about proving that nothing could take away the heart and passion that had always driven him. Marcus's recovery wasn't a linear process. There were good days and bad days, moments of doubt and frustration. But the more he practiced, the more he saw that there was life after the accident. Basketball wasn't just a game, it was a symbol of resilience, of never giving up. He didn't need to play at an NBA level to find meaning in the game. He just needed to play. The rehab staff and his family were amazed at his progress. He had come so far in such a short time, and his determination was contagious. The other patients at the rehab facility began to take notice, inspired by Marcus's ability to push through his pain and keep going. He became a quiet leader, offering words of encouragement to others, showing them that it was possible to move forward, no matter the circumstances. One afternoon, after an intense practice session, Marcus sat down with one of the therapists, catching his breath. "I can't believe how far I've come," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. The therapist smiled at him. "You've come a long way, Marcus. But you've always had it in you. You just needed to believe it again." Marcus nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. I think Jordan believed in me before I even believed in myself. That's what kept me going. That's what made me want to keep fighting. The therapist looked at him, understanding. Sometimes, that's all it takes, someone to believe in you when you don't know how to believe in yourself. It was a lesson that Marcus had learned the hard way. But he had learned it. And now, he was determined to use that lesson to help others. He began to speak more about his journey, sharing his story with the other patients at the facility, offering advice, encouragement, and hope. He didn't know what the future held for him, but he knew that he had something valuable to share. His story was one of overcoming, of resilience, and it was something that others could hold on to. The more Marcus embraced his new reality, the more he realized that this chapter of his life had meaning far beyond basketball. He had the opportunity to impact others, to show them that no matter how hard life gets, it's possible to pick yourself back up. The accident may have taken his leg, but it hadn't taken his spirit. That was something no one could ever take from him. And as the days passed, Marcus found himself getting closer to a new goal. He wasn't sure what that goal was yet, but he was confident that, whatever it was, he could achieve it. The past no longer held him back. It was a part of him, but it didn't define him. He was moving forward, one step at a time, one shot at a time. And with each step, he was proving to himself that, despite everything that had happened, he could still play the game. And in that, he found peace. Marcus stood in front of the full-length mirror in his room at the rehab center, gazing at the prosthetic leg strapped to his body. He had come a long way since that first painful day in the gym when he had struggled just to take a few steps. The months of therapy, the hours spent practicing, all of it had brought him here. He wasn't back to where he had been, but he was closer than he had been in the days after the accident. Closer than he had thought possible. The rehab facility had become a second home for him. It was where he had faced his deepest fears, his greatest doubts, and his toughest challenges. But now, it was a place of possibility. It was where he rediscovered his love for basketball, where he had realized that even after everything had been taken from him, there was still something worth fighting for. And now, every morning, he found himself waking up with purpose again. A purpose that, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like a distant dream. His thoughts wandered back to the day Jordan had given him the prosthetic. He remembered the look on Jordan's face, the quiet confidence that his old rival had in him. He had expected the gift, of course, but the weight of it, the idea that Jordan believed in him so much that he would take time out of his own life to make something that would help him feel whole again, was overwhelming. It wasn't just the prosthetic leg that had changed Marcus's outlook on life. It was Jordan's belief in him. That belief had sparked something in Marcus, something he had almost forgotten existed. It had lit a fire under him. Now, as he stood there in front of the mirror, he took a deep breath, straightened his back, and began practicing again. His movements were still a bit stiff, but he was getting there. The goal wasn't perfection, he wasn't trying to get back to the player he had once been. But what mattered was that he was playing again, that he was proving to himself that he still had it in him. Every dribble, every shot, was a step toward reclaiming his own sense of self. The sound of his basketball bouncing off the floor echoed in the quiet room. He had become familiar with that sound. It was a comfort, like an old friend. The rhythm of it made him feel alive again. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to find one of the rehab therapists standing in the doorway. The therapist had been working with him since the early days of his recovery, helping him adjust to the prosthetic, teaching him how to move and balance. "Marcus, you're looking good," the therapist said with a smile. "You've been making incredible progress. Are you ready for your session today?" Marcus nodded, a small grin on his face. "Yeah, I'm ready. I've been practicing a little bit on my own." "That's great to hear," the therapist replied. "We're going to push you a little more today. Let's see what you've got." The therapist guided him out to the gym, a familiar space that now felt like a place of new beginnings. Other patients were there, working on their own exercises. The gym was a blend of determination and struggle, everyone working toward their own personal goals. But Marcus wasn't paying attention to anyone else. His eyes were fixed on the basket at the far end of the gym. He dribbled the ball once, twice, and then took a shot. It didn't go in. He felt the familiar frustration rise, but instead of letting it take over, he reminded himself of how far he had come. That shot was no different from the hundreds of missed shots he had taken over the years, the ones that had pushed him to be better, to keep working, to keep fighting. Try it again, the therapist encouraged. You've got this. Marcus took another deep breath and shot again. This time, the ball swished through the net, the sound of it landing in the hoop almost musical. He couldn't help but smile, the satisfaction of the shot feeling better than he expected. That's it, the therapist said, clapping him on the back. You're on your way. The session continued, and Marcus worked hard, pushing his body, testing his limits. Every time he made progress, it fueled him to go further. There were moments of pain, of doubt, but they were fleeting. Each time he doubted himself, he reminded himself of the reasons he was doing this, of the people who believed in him, especially Jordan. The therapist watched as Marcus practiced a series of drills, each one designed to improve his agility and strength with the new leg. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't about returning to the player he used to be, it was about creating a new version of himself, one that had been forged in the fires of hardship. And with every movement, Marcus felt himself becoming stronger, more capable, more determined. When the session ended, Marcus was exhausted but fulfilled. His body ached, but the ache was different now. It wasn't the kind of ache that came from feeling defeated. It was the kind of ache that came from progress, from growth. He had taken another step forward, and that was all that mattered. Later that evening, after the gym had emptied out and the rehab center had settled into a quiet calm, Marcus sat on the bench in the gym, the basketball resting by his side. He closed his eyes, taking in the stillness, the quiet of the space. He thought about the journey he had been on. There had been moments when he didn't think he could go on, when the pain seemed too much to bear, when he wondered if he would ever feel like himself again. But now, as he sat there, he realized something. He had never truly been alone. Jordan had given him more than just a prosthetic leg. He had given him the belief that he could still achieve greatness, that he could still be someone who mattered, even without the fame and the glory of the basketball world. Marcus stood up and grabbed the basketball, his fingers tightening around it. He walked toward the basket, the familiar rhythm of the game flowing through him. He was still getting used to the new leg, still adjusting, but there was something about the game that had always been a part of him. And now, it felt like the game had come back to him. Slowly, steadily, it was becoming his again. He took another shot, and this time, it didn't matter whether it went in or not. What mattered was that he was here, that he was playing again, and that he had the strength to keep going. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Marcus had spent the past few months dedicating himself to rebuilding his body and his spirit. Every morning he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, and each day, he found himself moving a little bit closer to the person he had been before the accident. But even with the progress he'd made, there were moments when the weight of what had happened still felt heavy. It wasn't just about learning to walk again, it was about learning to live in a world that had changed in ways he hadn't expected. The physical progress had been tangible, but the emotional journey was something far more complicated. For the first time in a long while, Marcus started to feel a bit of his old self returning. He had become a regular at the gym at the rehab center, practicing every move, every shot, every dribble. Some days, it felt easier. Other days, it felt like he was taking 2 steps back for every 1 step forward. But even on those harder days, he had learned to push through. One evening, as he was wrapping up his session, he saw a familiar face. It was his old teammate from high school, someone he hadn't seen in years. The man walked toward him with a broad smile on his face. "Marcus, man. I can't believe it." "You're back here," the man exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief and admiration. Marcus grinned, surprised by the encounter. "Yeah, man, just trying to get back in the game. It's been a long road." The man shook his head in amazement. "I heard about the accident, man. Honestly, I didn't think you'd ever walk again, let alone get back to basketball." There was a pause, a long silence between them. Marcus didn't know how to respond. For years, he had been the one people expected great things from. But after the accident, the doubts had started creeping in. There were moments when he, too, had wondered if he would ever be the same. But standing here now, after everything he had been through, he could tell that there was something different. The accident had changed him, yes, but it hadn't broken him. It had taken a piece of him, but it had also given him a new strength. "I'm not where I was, but I'm not done," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. His old teammate slapped him on the back. "Man, if anyone could come back from this, it's you. I always knew you had that drive. Always saw it in you." Marcus smiled, grateful for the compliment but unsure of what it meant. The days of playing in front of crowds and being known as the best player on the court seemed far away. But something inside him stirred, a small spark of the competitor he had once been. "I've still got a lot of work to do," Marcus replied. "But I'll get there." Over the next few weeks, Marcus began making steady progress. He was spending more time in the gym, working on his fitness and agility, testing his limits. The therapists at the rehab center were impressed by his progress, and his family began to notice a shift in him. He was becoming more like the old Marcus, the one who was always pushing himself to be better, who never stopped fighting for what he wanted. But even with all the improvements, Marcus knew the real challenge was still ahead. The question of whether he could ever play the game he loved again still lingered in the back of his mind. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face that challenge head-on. The idea of stepping onto a real basketball court again, competing at a level he once took for granted, filled him with a mixture of excitement and dread. One evening, after finishing his rehab session, Marcus sat down with his family. His mom, dad, and sister had all been there through the worst of it, and now, as he sat there with them, he realized how much they had supported him without question. His mother looked at him with a proud smile. "Marcus, you've come so far. You've shown so much strength these past few months. You've got this." Marcus shifted in his seat. "I don't know, Mom. I feel like I'm moving forward, but I don't know if I'll ever be the same. What if I can't play again?" His father, who had always been his biggest supporter, leaned forward. "Son, you've already proven something bigger than basketball. You've shown that no matter what life throws at you, you get back up. That's more important than anything." Marcus took a deep breath. His father's words resonated with him. He had spent so much time worrying about whether he would ever be able to play at the level he once had, but he hadn't stopped to realize that he had already won. He had already conquered the hardest battle of all, the battle with himself. Still, the nagging question remained, could he ever return to the game? A few weeks later, Jordan called. The familiar ring of the phone was enough to bring Marcus's heart racing, even after everything that had happened. "Hey, man. How's it going?" Jordan's voice was steady, as confident as always. "I'm good. Really good, actually," Marcus replied, smiling. "I've been putting in the work. Getting better every day." "I'm glad to hear it," Jordan said, his voice serious. "Listen, I've been thinking a lot about you lately, and I want to ask you something." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What's up?" "I want you to come play in a charity game I'm putting together," Jordan said. "It's a low-pressure thing, but I think it would be great for you. It'll give you a chance to see how you feel on the court again, to get that rhythm back." Marcus's mind raced. The idea of stepping onto a court again, of playing in front of people, was overwhelming. But this was Jordan. The man who had once been his rival, who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. "Are you sure about this, Mike?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with hesitation. "I'm sure," Jordan said, his tone warm but firm. "You've got this. I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in you." The invitation was more than just a game. It was an opportunity to prove something to himself, to finally see if he could come back in a way that felt right. He hadn't fully trusted himself yet. He hadn't believed that he could do it. But this offer from Jordan changed that. It wasn't about playing at a professional level, it was about taking that first step back onto the court, putting himself back in a place where he had always felt free. "All right," Marcus said after a long pause. "I'll do it." "Great," Jordan said, his voice filled with excitement. "We'll make it happen. It's time for you to get back in the game, Marcus." As Marcus hung up the phone, he felt a new sense of resolve. He wasn't ready to step into the NBA just yet. He wasn't sure if he would ever get back to that point. But what he knew was that this charity game would be the first step in reclaiming his identity, his passion, and his love for the game. And that, he realized, was all he needed to keep moving forward. For the first time in months, Marcus felt the weight of doubt begin to lift. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was ready to take that next step, one shot, one move, one game at a time. The day of the charity game arrived, and Marcus could feel the butterflies in his stomach. It was hard to believe how far he had come since the accident. A few months ago, the thought of stepping onto a basketball court again had seemed like an impossible dream. Now, here he was, about to face the reality of it. His body still felt different, his movements still a little slower than they used to be, but there was something else that had changed, his mindset. He no longer saw this as just a game. It was a chance to reclaim a part of himself that he thought he had lost forever. Jordan had organized the charity game as a way to raise money for a local cause, but for Marcus, it had become much more than that. This game wasn't about winning or losing, it was about taking that first step back into a world he thought he had been shut out of. It was about proving to himself that he could still play, still be the person he wanted to be. The event was taking place in a local gymnasium, a familiar place for Marcus, though now it felt different. The court, the stands, the familiar squeak of sneakers on the floor, everything had changed, but it was still home. He walked into the gym, and the smell of basketball, a combination of old gym floors and sweat, was a strange comfort. There was a crowd gathering, not a huge one, but enough to remind him that people still remembered who he was, what he had done in the past. As he entered the locker room, he saw a few familiar faces, old teammates, friends from the past, and even a few former competitors who had heard about his recovery and come to show their support. They all greeted him with smiles, slaps on the back, and words of encouragement, but Marcus could feel the nervous energy coursing through him. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would his leg hold up? Would he be able to keep up with the pace of the game? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he didn't let it show. Not now. Jordan walked in shortly after Marcus had finished getting dressed. The sight of his old rival, now a global icon, always struck Marcus in the same way. He remembered how, as kids, they had dreamed of being in the spotlight. Back then, it had been something they had shared. And now, here they were, on opposite ends of their careers, but still connected by the same love of the game. "You ready?" Jordan asked, his voice filled with the same confidence that had always marked him. His presence was commanding, but his tone was warm. "I think so," Marcus replied, his voice a little shakier than he would have liked. "I'm a little nervous." Jordan laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "You're gonna be fine, man. Just go out there and play. You've got this." Marcus smiled, though he didn't feel entirely sure of himself. But there was something in Jordan's words, and the way he said it, that gave him a sense of calm. Jordan had been through it all. He had battled his own demons, faced setbacks, and come back stronger every time. Marcus knew if anyone could understand what he was going through, it was Jordan. The game was about to start, and as the players filed onto the court, Marcus felt the nerves return. He had missed the feeling of the ball in his hands, the anticipation of a shot, the rush of the game. But the anxiety still lingered. Could he still do this? Could he still be the player he once was? He took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. It wasn't about being the best. It wasn't about competing against anyone but himself. It was about taking that first step. The game began, and Marcus found himself on the court, standing alongside Jordan, who was as intense as ever. Marcus moved slowly at first, careful with his steps, testing the new leg, feeling it out. He wasn't sure how much he could push himself, but as the game progressed, he began to find his rhythm. His movements were a little slower than before, but the muscle memory was still there. He made a few solid passes, grabbed a couple of rebounds, and even sank a shot from mid-range. Each moment was a victory, and with each small success, the self-doubt began to fade. Jordan, of course, was still Jordan. He played with the same intensity that had made him a legend. But what surprised Marcus was how Jordan seemed to adjust his game to help him. He didn't dominate the ball or try to steal the show. Instead, he passed to Marcus, encouraging him to take shots, to make plays. It wasn't about showing off for the crowd. It was about helping his old rival, his old friend, find his footing again. In a way, the game felt like it was being played in slow motion for Marcus. Every move felt calculated, every step measured. But as the game went on, the rhythm started to return. He wasn't moving as quickly as he used to, but he didn't need to. He was in control of the game in a way that he hadn't been in months. His confidence was growing with every pass, every move. By the end of the game, Marcus had made a few more shots, set up some solid plays, and contributed to his team's win. The crowd cheered, but it wasn't the applause that made Marcus feel accomplished. It was the sense that he had done it. He had faced the uncertainty, the fear, and had pushed through. For the first time in a long time, he felt like himself again. After the game, Jordan came over to congratulate him. "See? Told you had it in you," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You did great out there." Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Mike. I don't know if I would have done it without you." Jordan chuckled. "You would have. You've always had that fire. I just reminded you of it." As the two of them stood there, chatting with teammates and fans, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had done it. He had faced his fears, stepped back onto the court, and had played the game again. It wasn't the same as it once was, and maybe it never would be, but it was enough. He wasn't just getting back to basketball. He was getting back to himself. The evening ended with a sense of closure, but also a sense of possibility. Marcus wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing: he was on the right path. He wasn't done. The accident had changed him, but it hadn't taken everything from him. It had forced him to look at his life in a new way, but it had also shown him that he still had the strength to overcome, to move forward. As the crowd began to leave, Marcus stood by the court for a few moments longer, staring at the empty gym. It was quiet now, but he could still hear the sound of the ball bouncing, the swish of the net, the echoes of the game. It was a sound he would never forget, a sound that would always remind him of who he was. And as he turned to leave, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. It wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where Marcus was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by what he had the strength to gain. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was his to walk. And for the first time in a long while, he walked with his head held high. The weeks following the charity game left Marcus with a renewed sense of purpose. While he knew it wasn't a grand return to his former basketball career, it had been a pivotal moment in his journey. The physical and emotional progress he'd made since the accident was undeniable, but the game had pushed him even further. It wasn't just about proving something to the people watching or even to his old rival, Jordan. It was about proving to himself that he could still overcome. The doubts that had once consumed him were beginning to fade. Marcus continued his rehabilitation, but now there was a new fire in him. He was determined to stay on the path he had started. The old fear of never being good enough was slowly being replaced with a belief that he could still do something meaningful with his life, even if it wasn't on the court in the way he had originally imagined. The days at the rehab center had become more than just about physical recovery, they had become about rediscovering what basketball meant to him. His sessions were less about regaining the basics and more about learning to play with the new reality of his body. Every jump, every dribble, every step was now intentional. And slowly, the once foreign movements began to feel more familiar again. One afternoon, as he was practicing in the gym, Marcus received a phone call. It was from a local high school coach, someone he had known for years but had lost touch with after the accident. The coach, an older man with a deep respect for the game, had always admired Marcus's work ethic and skill. "Marcus, I heard about what you've been up to," the coach's voice crackled through the phone. "I don't know if you've thought about it, but we're looking for an assistant coach for the varsity team this season. I'd love to have you come aboard." Marcus paused, his mind racing. Coaching was never something he had considered seriously before. His dreams had always been about playing, about being the one in the spotlight. But now, with the prospect of never returning to his professional career, coaching began to sound like something that could bring him the satisfaction he was searching for. It would allow him to stay close to the game, to help others navigate the challenges he had faced, and to contribute in a way that was still meaningful. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Marcus said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I'm still working on myself, still trying to figure out where I fit in the game." The coach's voice softened. "I get it, Marcus. But you've got something special. And you know this game better than anyone. These kids need someone who understands what it takes to get back up when life knocks you down. You've lived that. You don't have to be the star player to make a difference. Just think about it." Marcus sat in silence for a moment, turning the idea over in his head. It felt like an opportunity to bring his journey full circle. Coaching wasn't just about teaching plays or running drills, it was about sharing the lessons he had learned from his own struggles, the resilience that had driven him to get back to the game he loved. It was about helping others believe in themselves, even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against them. "I'll think about it," Marcus finally replied. Over the next few days, Marcus continued to practice, but the thought of coaching lingered in his mind. He spent time reflecting on how far he had come, both physically and mentally. He had learned so much through his recovery, and it wasn't just about regaining his mobility. It was about learning to approach life with a new perspective. Basketball had always been his escape, his passion, but now it had become his vehicle for healing. Perhaps, he thought, it could do the same for others. The decision didn't come easily, but Marcus eventually called the coach back. "I'm in," he said, his voice filled with newfound conviction. "Let's do this." The first day on the job was a whirlwind. The high school gym was filled with the noise of sneakers screeching on the hardwood, basketballs bouncing, and the hum of excited chatter from the players. Marcus walked into the gym, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. But this time, he wasn't on the court as a player. He was on the sidelines, coaching a team that was eager to learn and grow. He watched the players with a keen eye, noticing the way they interacted, how they communicated, and how they responded to coaching. He quickly realized that coaching wasn't just about telling players what to do, it was about understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, and their potential. It was about giving them the tools to succeed, not just on the court, but in life. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus began to feel more comfortable in his new role. He wasn't just teaching basketball techniques, he was mentoring the players, offering them guidance based on his own journey. He told them about the struggles he had faced, the doubts he had fought through, and how he had learned to keep pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible. He didn't sugarcoat his story, he shared the raw, difficult moments, and how those moments had shaped him into the person he was now. The players listened intently. They were used to hearing about success stories, about athletes who had made it big, but they hadn't often heard about the other side, the side where failure, injury, and self-doubt played a role in shaping someone's career. Marcus's story resonated with them. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being persistent. It was about showing up every day, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. One evening, after a particularly tough practice, one of the players approached Marcus. The kid, a freshman with raw talent but a lot of self-doubt, hesitated before speaking. "Coach, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm good enough to make the team." Marcus looked at the player, remembering the same fears and doubts he had had when he was younger. He smiled, placing a hand on the kid's shoulder. "Listen, I've been there. I've had those same thoughts, and I can tell you this, you don't get better by avoiding the hard stuff. You get better by facing it. Every time you feel like you can't go on, that's when you're closest to breaking through. Trust me." The player looked up at him, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Thanks, coach. Marcus watched as the kid walked back to his teammates, a little more confident than before. In that moment, Marcus knew that coaching wasn't just about basketball. It was about helping these young players understand the power they had within themselves. It was about showing them that their limitations weren't the end of their story, they were just the beginning. As the season progressed, Marcus continued to pour himself into his role. The team's success wasn't measured in championships or titles, it was measured in the growth he saw in each of the players. They were becoming more confident, more determined, and more connected as a team. Marcus had shown them what it meant to push through the tough times, to keep working when it felt like the world was against them. By the end of the season, the team had exceeded expectations. They didn't win every game, but they had learned the most important lesson of all, resilience. And for Marcus, that was enough. It wasn't about getting back to the NBA, it was about finding his place in the game again, in a way that felt true to who he had become. He had given everything he had to basketball, and now, he was giving back to those who were just beginning their journey. The experience had been everything Marcus had hoped for and more. He had found a new purpose in coaching, a new way to stay connected to the game that had defined his life. But more than that, he had found a way to help others see their potential, just as Jordan had helped him see his. In the end, it wasn't the game that mattered most, it was the lessons learned, the growth achieved, and the people who had helped him along the way. The season had come to an end, and the gym was quieter now. The players had gone home, the lights had been turned off, and Marcus sat alone on the court. He watched the last few remnants of the game fade in the silence of the empty gym. It was the same gym he had spent so many years in, running drills, shooting baskets, working relentlessly to achieve his dreams. It felt like a lifetime ago. But now, instead of the endless pursuit of personal glory, Marcus was content. He had become something more, something that wasn't about personal accolades or the spotlight. The game had given him his identity once, but now, he had rediscovered it in a different form. He had found peace in coaching, in teaching, in mentoring the young athletes who reminded him so much of his younger self. It was a satisfaction that came not from points scored or games won, but from the impact he had made on others. As he sat there, the door to the gym creaked open. It was Jordan. He stepped inside, looking as confident as ever, but there was a softness in his gaze when he saw Marcus sitting there. "You know, I used to hate when you'd stay late after practice," Jordan said with a grin. "You'd always be the last one to leave, and I could never get you to stop working." Marcus laughed, looking up at his old rival. "Guess some things never change, huh?" Jordan walked over and sat down next to him. "I've been hearing a lot about the season. The team did great." "It wasn't about the wins and losses," Marcus said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "It was about seeing these kids grow, seeing them push past their doubts. I don't know if I would have appreciated it as much if I was still playing. Coaching them, being there for them, it feels like what I was meant to do." Jordan nodded thoughtfully. "I can see that. You've got the ability to make a difference. It's not just about teaching them basketball. It's about teaching them life." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It felt like the weight of the past had finally lifted, like all the years of competition, the struggles, and the doubts had come to an end. They were both different men now, men who had experienced the highs and lows of life and had come out on the other side stronger. "You know," Marcus said, breaking the silence, "there were times I thought I'd never make it back. After the accident, I thought I had lost everything. I thought my time was up." "I know the feeling," Jordan replied. "I went through it myself. But that's when you find out who you really are. Not in the easy times, but in the hard ones. The ones that make you question everything." Marcus nodded. "Yeah. And it's funny because I thought I had to get back to the old me. I thought I had to be the guy who dominated the court. But the more I worked with the team, the more I realized that I didn't need to be that guy anymore. I needed to be someone who could show them the way forward. I needed to be someone who could teach them not just how to play, but how to overcome." Jordan smiled. "That's the real victory, Marcus. Not the points you score, but the lives you change. That's what really matters." There was a long pause, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt at peace. He had spent so many years chasing something, a dream, a title, a spot in the history books. But now, he realized that the true measure of success wasn't in the recognition he had craved, but in the impact he had made. The people he had helped. The kids he had mentored. The lessons he had passed on. "I never thought I'd be here, man," Marcus said quietly, looking down at his hands. "I never thought I'd be coaching. But I'm glad I am. I think it's exactly where I'm supposed to be." Jordan patted him on the back. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. You've come a long way. We both have. It's not about what you lose, it's about what you gain. And you've gained something a lot of people will never understand. You've gained the ability to give back, to help others rise up." Marcus smiled, his heart full. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was the one he had found. And in some ways, it felt even more fulfilling than the dreams he had once had. He had taken his hardship and used it to help others, to show them that the game didn't just belong to those who succeeded. It belonged to everyone who dared to play, to everyone who chose to fight through adversity. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," Marcus said, standing up and walking toward the door. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this much: I'm not afraid anymore." As he walked out of the gym with Jordan by his side, Marcus felt a sense of closure. He wasn't just moving forward physically, he was moving forward in every way. He had found his place in the game again, not as a player, but as a teacher, a mentor, a guide for the next generation. The lights of the gym flickered off behind him, and for the first time, Marcus didn't look back. He had come full circle. The journey that had started with a childhood rivalry had led him to this moment, one of redemption, one of purpose, and one of true fulfillment. He had found the peace he had been searching for, not in the game itself, but in the way it had allowed him to grow and, in turn, help others grow. Jordan looked over at him as they walked into the night. "You've got this, Marcus. You're exactly where you need to be." Marcus didn't need any more confirmation. He already knew.